Well, ladies and gents, you spoke your minds and the results are in. The first Primarchs we will discuss on this series will be Vulcan. For future reference, all polls are in the Community tab and will be occurring every 3 or so days until September. If you would like to vote as to who are the 4 finalists of each poll, that is in my Discord server linked to the channel. We will begin where most stories begin, at the beginning. You don't need to know who or why, just know that all Primarchs got scattered across the galaxy at infancy. The planet that Vulcan landed on was the death world of Nocturne. Now, you'll start to notice as this plays out, just about everywhere Vulcan goes, he is beloved. It was no different on Nocturne. It wasn't long after crashing into the planet, specifically through some poor blacksmith's roof, he was seen as a prophetic child. You'll notice that with a lot of Primarchs. Via the enhanced maturation seen in all Primarchs, Vulcan shortly grew into his truly hulking stature and through his enhanced intelligence became an expert forge master and combatant. Now, Vulcan did what Vulcan does, hanging out on Nocturne, becoming best friends with everybody before his first real test against a skilled enemy came at the hands of the Dark Elves, also known as the Drukhari. Now, the Drukhari are considered to be some of the most depraved, malicious, and sadistic beings spanning the universe. When you hear about something horrific occurring to the Drukhari, you should never feel bad about it because understand they absolutely deserved it. Normally, when faced with these sort of slaving raids, the citizenry of Nocturne would hide and cower in hopes that they would not be taken. Vulcan would seize this opportunity to single-handedly mount a defense of Nocturne's innocent. Picking up 2 massive smithing hammers, he would decimate the Drukhari forces, having killed over 100 of them before they fled the planet. This would lead to Vulcan becoming a living legend that the people of Nocturne would hold a massive celebration for. This celebration culminated in a tournament of skills, kind of like the Highland Games. During the opening ceremony, amongst all the fanfare, a rather unassuming man draped in a cloak approached. The man didn't say much, only asking that he be allowed to compete in the games, claiming that he could beat any challenger across Nocturne. Naturally, everyone scoffed, as Vulcan was going to be the clear winner, but they allowed him to give it his best shot anyway. Things went as expected every time there's a mysterious challenger introduced to a story. Vulcan and the stranger were locked in a stalemate across all 8 days of the tournament, while nobody else was capable of catching up. As a tiebreaker, the men were tasked with forging a weapon, then using that weapon to slay what we would consider a dragon, called a salamander on the planet of Nocturne. Whoever came back with the larger salamander would be the clear winner of the contest. So, both men began their climb to the top of a volcano to start their hunt. Vulcan, finding his trophy first, struck down a massive salamander and began carrying it back to the village. However, fate would interrupt his trek back home when the volcano erupted beneath his feet. Being launched off the edge of a cliff, Vulcan grabbed hold of the precipice while still maintaining control over his prize, not wanting to lose it to the lava below. After several hours of hanging, the stranger would appear with an even greater salamander than Vulcan. The stranger would then proceed to throw his trophy into the lava so that Vulcan would be able to escape with his life. Upon reaching the festival, Vulcan was considered the winner as the stranger arrived empty-handed. Despite being determined the victor, Vulcan would refuse the accolade and, to the surprise of everyone in attendance, swear undying loyalty to his challenger for saving his life. It was then that the stranger revealed himself to be Vulcan's true father, the all-powerful Emperor of mankind. Vulcan then agreed to join his father's empire as the leader of the 18th Space Marine Legion on the condition that Nocturne remain defended in his absence. To this day, it still remains under the watchful eye of his 18th Legion, dubbed after the very creature he slew that day, the Salamanders. Vulcan, unlike other Primarchs, did not immediately receive command over his legion. Instead, he was put under the tutelage of the Emperor himself. A result of this membership was that Vulcan, similarly to his experience on Nocturne, became something of a legend. I could spend all day telling exploits of Vulcan and his salamanders on a plethora of battlefronts, but there's much more we need to speak about, so I'll try to keep it short by giving you the general vibe of them. I believe the Salamanders to be, by far, the most level-headed legion in terms of command structure. I also consider them to be the most respectable in terms of conduct. Salamanders are one of the very few legions where honor is not conflated with ego. Upon arriving late to the party and fending off an orc invasion with reinforcements, Vulcan ordered the men he saved to stand up so that he may instead kneel in respect to them. This is going to be a common theme in anyone under the Salamander's banner, including Vulcan himself. Where most other Space Marines feel the unerring need to serve, the Salamanders feel the need to protect. Whether it be charging headfirst into the fray or disobeying direct orders from other legions, they do not let anything stand between them and the innocent civilians they have sworn to defend. Fast forwarding to the heresy, this is when Vulcan's true might begins to go on full display. His brother Horus ends up co-signing to Chaos Inc., convincing his brothers Fulgrim, Mortarion, Angron, and their legions to rebel against the Emperor. Vulcan's legion was one of the 3 first sent to face off with the newfound traitors. They were also intended to be backed by 7 other legions, but unfortunately for them, 4 of those 7 legions were also traitors waiting for their time to strike. The Salamanders, Raven Guard, and Iron Hands were decimated in what would be known as the Dropsite Massacre of Istvan V. The Primarch Perturabo of the Iron Warriors was tasked with killing the Salamanders. Purdy decided he wasn't getting his hands dirty that day, so he instead decided to scorch the landscape with several nuclear warheads, destroying Vulcan and his Salamanders. So, sadly, this is where Vulcan's story comes to an end. Right? Wrong. You see, as luck would have it, Vulcan is not only the physically strongest of his brothers, he is also the most resilient. Turns out that day Vulcan discovered that he was a perpetual, a being who doesn't abide by the simple confines and finality of death. Unfortunately for Vulcan, that's gonna turn out to fucking suck not too long from now. As Vulcan awoke in a crater surrounded by his dead sons, his body began to mend itself. He then gained his bearings and realized he was surrounded by enemy forces, specifically the Night Lords of Conrad Curze. Vulcan then decided he had no intention of going quietly into this night. Ripping and tearing the Night Haunter's legion asunder, he took damn near an entire legion's worth of shooting, stabbing, and beating to finally knock unconscious. When Vulcan would finally regain consciousness, he found himself imprisoned on the ship of none other than Conrad Curze. Having a less than positive history with one another due to their methods of war, Conrad would exploit his brother's newfound ability to see just how immortal he really was. Vulcan was tortured and killed around the clock countless times over countless days. After every death and subsequent regeneration, his captor would become increasingly furious. You see, Conrad considered himself a bit of an aficionado when it came to murder, so when you don't die after Conrad kills you, he gets pretty upset. From throwing him out into the vacuum of space, incinerating him in the rocket thruster, ripping out his throat, decapitation, and more, Vulcan would always come back. He was then placed in situations where he had to helplessly watch innocents die, time and time again, in effort to break his mind. Once again, to no avail, further incensing Curze. In further effort to mentally break Vulcan, as he couldn't physically, Conrad had his priests dig their claws into his brother's mind in attempts to drive him insane. As before, the Lord of Drake's will was indomitable. In a last-ditch effort, Curze had Perturabo, the expert craftsman that he was, create an impossible labyrinth containing Vulcan's Warhammer. Vulcan would reach the hammer once Conrad plainly opened a path in the maze directly to it, because if you haven't noticed yet, Conrad was, and always has been, absolutely batshit insane. I know this is a Vulcan video, but we're going to take a second for Conrad here. He was so mentally deranged that he had the galaxy's most elaborate maze created to kill an immortal for eternity. This all a result of him being pissed because he was running out of ways to torture the man. So not only does he have an impossible labyrinth constructed for one guy, but he completely defeats the point of it because he, again, gets so angry that he demands he kill this unkillable being himself. He doesn't stop there. He proceeds to then get so irate he wants to do it in a fistfight. A fistfight with an immortal giant. Worse yet, he put Vulcan's actual hammer in the maze. A hammer that he makes very clear he is aware that there is a teleporter inside. The Joker wishes he had this level of stark raving lunacy and ability to self-sabotage in every scenario. Anyway, Vulcan shitcans Conrad with the hammer because, as Vulcan says, "Brother, you forget one thing. It's still a hammer," and then uses the teleporter inside the hammer. After beating Conrad and using the teleporter, he is sent into the atmosphere of our boy Robert Gillysuit's home planet and becomes effectively a meteor. Plummeting down to the surface, the impact of him against the ground was pretty much the straw that broke the camel's back. When he came to, he was worse for wear. Eventually, through stroke of unfortuitous circumstance, Conrad ends up on the very same planet, once again trying to kill Vulcan. Then, in a seemingly unrelated incident, Vulcan happens to get stabbed right in the heart with a semi-holy weapon and appears to have lost the ability to heal himself. Believing Vulcan cannot truly be dead, his Salamanders attempt to deliver him back to Nocturne for a revival ceremony. They were pursued by the 17th and 14th Legions on the way back to their homeworld, but shook the word-bearers and ravaged the Death Guard upon arrival to Nocturne, sending them running with their tail between their legs. Tragically, Vulcan would not be resuscitated, as nobody was able to unjam the holy bolt protruding from his chest. Believing him well and truly dead, his people lowered him into the maw of a volcano, as is customary for them. Even those who had seen Vulcan recover time and time again accepted his death in time. All but one. Artellus Numion was not so willing to accept the fate of his Primarch, and in a final effort of self-sacrifice for his leader, he too threw himself into the volcano. When a search party set out to find Artellus, they came upon a gargantuan silhouette standing amongst the ash and fire. Upon further approach, this towering being was recognized as not Artellus, but the Primarch of the 18th, still clutching the artifact embedded within his heart. Once again, Vulcan lived. Vulcan had woken up in a state of amnesia, but spent time talking to a strange entity telling him he needs to return to Terra, also known as Earth, divulging an artifact of great power known as the Talisman of Seven Hammers, also giving Vulcan a hammer. You'll notice that Vulcan really likes hammers. Vulcan told the men that found him to keep his revival secret while he used the talisman to open up the webway, which is essentially a realm of wormholes and fuckery intertwined with the universe. Traipsing through the webway, he nearly got involved in a completely separate war. We're fast-forwarding for the sake of time to Vulcan reaching Terra. We'll talk about the webway later. Upon reaching Terra, he would have a brief reunion with his brother Rogel Dorn before being ushered into the Emperor's throne room. The Emperor, who was at this time bound to his golden throne, divulged the purpose of the talisman Vulcan was in possession of. The talisman exists for the purpose of decimating Terra. Think localized Death Star beam. Should Horus be able to win this galactic war, Vulcan was supposed to use it. It was entrusted to Vulcan as he was seen as the most trustworthy of all his brothers, considering him to be the most hesitant to use such a device due to his unparalleled appreciation for life. Vulcan would then posit himself as the personal guard of the Emperor during Horus's siege of Terra. This would lead to a confrontation with his brother Magnus, Primarch of the Thousand Suns. They had fought to a standstill until Magnus broke for a killing blow that was intercepted by one of Vulcan's sons, Beric. Enraged by this, Vulcan picked up two hammers and proceeded to beat Magnus into a bloody heap of broken bones, but could not kill him as Magnus would surrender himself to chaos for salvation. Magnus was now a demonic prince within the webway, attempting to sap the power from the Emperor. Vulcan was then tasked to venture back into the webway to destroy his traitorous brother once and for all. Magnus attempted psychic manipulation in an effort to turn his brother over to his side, but Vulcan was having none of it. Pressing through all the illusion, he would finally discover his brother and start delivering smoke. Magnus was no longer a man now, nearly twice the height of his brother, sprouting a pair of wings and horns, wielding a large bladed staff. He was more akin to the evil machinations of chaos now. Vulcan would not be dissuaded by his brother's new form, immediately springing into attack. He would be struck down through violent blows, both physical and magical, repeatedly, but would never stay down. Having honed his ability to regenerate, he was capable of bringing himself back from death near instantaneously now. This was no longer a battle of strength, but determination, and nothing was more resolute than Vulcan. The will of Magnus was whittled away after each swing and spell cast as his brother chastised him for his arrogance. In a final attack lashed out towards his brother, Magnus attempted a spell to unravel Vulcan at a genetic level, but before it could fully take effect, Vulcan demolished his skull with the hammer. Upon Vulcan's return to the throne room, he found his father gone to fight Horus personally, a battle that would end the civil war and see the Emperor's forces triumphant, but incurring the loss of their leader in the process. After the war, Vulcan hasn't been all that active, his only real exhibition of activity being the annihilation of an orc war boss. It may be worth noting that in the process, he absorbed an incredible amount of psychic orc energy, which could prove interesting on his eventual return. Some believe him to be dead, but if there's one thing we've learned today, it's that killing the Lord of Drakes does not come so easy. I imagine he's just busy traversing the wide expanses of the universe, saving puppies and punching bad guys. And that's where our story ends for today. Once again, if you would like to vote on the finalists for the next poll, or just talk about Warhammer in general, go ahead and join the Discord server. It's also got plenty of loyal Helldivers players there, if that's your thing as well. Otherwise, thanks for pulling up a chair and listening to the story of everyone's favorite gentle giant. If you're familiar with Vulcan, go ahead and throw some of your favorite Vulcan stories in here. Otherwise, stay safe and have a good night.